Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at Soothing Sleep Tales. I'm Davis, and I'm honored to share another peaceful night with you. Tonight, I will guide you into a gentle sleep with a magical story about Elara, a traveler who embarks on a mystical journey through the Whispering Woods, uncovering hidden truths within herself as she explores a world of dreams and shadows. Take this time to leave behind the busyness of the day and embrace this quiet moment just for you. Feel your worries and tension gradually melt away as you drift toward a restful sleep. You've done so much today, and now it's time to let go. Settle into a comfortable position and allow your body and mind to fully relax. May your night be filled with peace and beautiful dreams. The Whispering Woods, Journey of the Dream Weaver. Chapter 1, The Whispering Woods. In the heart of an ancient land, where time seemed to slow and the stars glittered like tiny diamonds on velvet skies, there was a hidden forest known only in whispers, the Whispering Woods. Few knew of its existence, and fewer still dared to enter. Yet, it was said that those who ventured deep enough could find something extraordinary, something magical, capable of changing their lives forever. The Whispering Woods lay far beyond the boundaries of villages, through rolling hills and over moss-covered bridges where rivers ran so clear they reflected the heavens above. Legend spoke of trees that whispered secrets to those who listened carefully, of streams that sang lullabies to the weary, and of creatures that existed only in dreams. Our story begins with a woman named Elara, a traveler in search of rest. She wasn't just any traveler. Elara was a wanderer of worlds, someone who had spent years moving from place to place, never staying long enough to call any land home. Her heart was heavy with the weight of countless roads and endless nights spent beneath unfamiliar skies. Though she had traveled far, through cities built on cliffs and deserts where the sands glowed silver under moonlight, her spirit was restless, always yearning for something she could not name. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to shimmer, Elara found herself at the edge of a vast, dark forest. She had heard the name of this place only in fragments, whispered by villagers over crackling fires, always with a hint of awe and fear. The Whispering Woods. A soft breeze stirred the leaves at her feet, and for a moment she could have sworn she heard her name, carried on the wind like a long-forgotten memory. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Elara had always been attuned to the subtle energies of the world, vibrations that others might dismiss as imagination, but this was different. She stood at the threshold of the woods, feeling an odd pull, as though the forest itself was beckoning her to enter. The trees, tall and ancient, stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently, almost rhythmically, in the twilight breeze. Something about them seemed alive, not just in the way that all trees are, but as if they were waiting. Elara hesitated. She was weary from her journey, her legs aching and her mind foggy from days without proper rest. Yet, despite the exhaustion, a strange curiosity tugged at her heart. Perhaps this was the place she had been searching for, a place where she could finally find peace, even if just for a night. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward into the woods. The moment her foot touched the soft earth beneath the canopy, the air around her seemed to change. It became cooler, more fragrant, as though the very essence of the forest was wrapping around her like a soft cloak. The sounds of the outside world, the distant murmur of a stream, the chirping of crickets, faded away, replaced by an almost palpable silence. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled with presence, with the hum of something unseen yet very real. The trees seemed closer now, their towering forms swaying gently in the dim light. Every leaf, every blade of grass, seemed to pulse with a quiet energy. Elara moved deeper into the woods, her footsteps muffled by the soft forest floor. The path she followed was not one made by man, but by time, worn into the earth by countless creatures that had passed before her. Though there was no clear direction, she felt guided by an invisible hand, as if the forest itself was showing her the way. After walking for what felt like hours, though it could have been minutes, she came upon a small clearing. In the center stood a single tree, larger and older than any she had ever seen. Its bark was silver, shimmering faintly in the moonlight that filtered through the canopy above, and its roots twisted and curled into the earth like the hands of a giant. The air here felt different, thicker, as though filled with a kind of quiet power. Elara approached the tree slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, though she didn't know why. There was something ancient about this place, something sacred. She reached out, her fingers brushing the smooth, cool surface of the bark. The moment she touched it, a deep, resonant sound filled her ears. It was not a sound she could describe, not music, not a voice, but something in between. It was as though the tree itself was speaking to her, but not in words, more in feelings, in memories long forgotten. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt a sense of calm, of belonging. She leaned against the tree, her body sinking to the ground, exhaustion finally overtaking her. The forest around her seemed to breathe with her, each inhalation and exhalation matching the rise and fall of her chest. The tree's whispers became softer now, more like a lullaby, soothing and gentle, coaxing her into a peaceful sleep. As her eyes fluttered shut, Elara thought she heard a voice, soft and distant, yet undeniably real. "Rest now, traveler," it whispered, "for your journey has only just begun." And with that, she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, the whispering woods cradling her in its ancient arms as the night deepened around her. Thus began Elara's journey into a world of magic and mystery, where the boundaries between reality and dreams blurred, and where the forest itself seemed to hold the answers to questions she had never dared to ask. Chapter 2: Echoes of the Past. When Elara awoke, the first thing she noticed was the light. It wasn't the harsh brightness of morning sun, but a soft, silvery glow, like twilight stretching endlessly across the sky. The second thing she noticed was the silence. Not the kind that fills empty rooms or forgotten corners, but the kind that vibrates with presence, as though the world itself was waiting for something. She sat up slowly, blinking away the remnants of sleep, and looked around. The forest was different. It was the same clearing, the same ancient tree, yet something had shifted. The air felt thicker, more alive, as though it was charged with a quiet energy that hummed just beneath the surface. Elara stood, her muscles stiff from sleep, and as she did, she realized something strange. Though she had expected the ache of her long travels to still linger in her bones, she felt different. Lighter, somehow. More rested than she had been in years. It was as if the forest had drawn the weariness from her while she slept. She approached the great tree again, its bark still gleaming softly in the muted light. The surface felt warm under her fingertips, as though the tree held within it a secret fire, burning steadily, quietly. The whispers she had heard the night before were gone, but the sense of being watched, of being known, had not left her. Elara took a deep breath and looked around the clearing. For the first time, she noticed something odd about the trees that surrounded her. They weren't just standing tall and still, they were swaying, ever so gently, despite the absence of any wind. It was as if the entire forest was breathing in rhythm with her, a quiet inhalation and exhalation, as though sharing in her calm. But there was more. As she stood in the silence, she began to hear it, a faint sound, so distant at first she wasn't sure if it was real. It was like the soft tinkling of bells or the gentle rush of a far-off stream. Slowly, it grew louder, more distinct, until Elara could no longer ignore it. Following the sound, she stepped out of the clearing and deeper into the woods, her senses heightened, her steps careful. The trees parted before her, forming a natural path that seemed to lead her somewhere specific. The farther she walked, the clearer the sound became, and soon she realized what it was. Voices. But not just any voices, these were soft, melodic, and yet strangely familiar, like echoes from a dream long forgotten. They seemed to come from every direction, whispering in a language she didn't quite understand, but that felt as though it had been buried deep within her all along. It wasn't frightening, but instead filled her with a gentle curiosity, a desire to know more. As Elara walked, she noticed that the forest around her was changing. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting into intricate patterns that cast strange, shifting shadows on the ground. The leaves shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and the air was filled with a faint, sweet fragrance, like flowers blooming in the night. The path eventually led her to a place unlike any she had ever seen. It was a grove, but not like the clearing she had slept in. This grove felt sacred. The trees here were ancient, their bark covered in soft, glowing moss that illuminated the space with a gentle light. In the center of the grove stood a circle of stones, tall and smooth, each one marked with strange symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. The voices were louder here, though still just whispers, as if the stones themselves were speaking. Elara stepped closer, drawn to the center of the circle, and as she did, the ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate with energy. It was as though the earth itself was alive, humming with the same strange, quiet power she had felt ever since she entered the forest. She stood in the center of the stone circle, looking around in awe, when suddenly a figure appeared at the edge of the grove. Elara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure was tall, cloaked in a robe the color of midnight, its face hidden beneath a hood. It moved gracefully, almost as though it was gliding, and as it approached, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Elara's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't feel fear, only a strange sense of recognition, as though she had been waiting for this moment all her life. The figure stopped just outside the circle of stones, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with a tension that felt like the calm before a storm. Finally, the figure raised a hand, and as it did, the whispers fell silent. "Elara," it said, in a voice that was soft yet powerful, like the rustle of leaves in a storm. "You have come." Elara stared, her mind racing. How did this figure know her name? And more importantly, why did it feel like she had heard this voice before? "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it stepped forward, crossing the boundary of the stone circle with a quiet grace. As it did, the air around them seemed to shift, growing warmer, more vibrant. "I am a guide," the figure said finally, "a guardian of these woods, and of those who seek the truth within them." Elara frowned, confusion clouding her thoughts. "The truth? What truth?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering her question. "The truth that has been calling to you, whispering in your dreams, pulling you toward this place." For a moment, Elara was silent, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She had always felt a pull, a restlessness that had driven her from place to place, but she had never understood why. Could it be that this forest, this strange, magical place, held the answer? The figure stepped closer, its presence calm and steady. "You are not the first to seek answers here, Elara, and you will not be the last. But the answers you seek are not found in words or in the world outside. They are found within, in the quiet spaces of the soul." Elara swallowed, her throat tight. "I don't understand." "You will," the figure said softly, and for a moment, its voice seemed to come from all around her, echoing in the air and in the earth beneath her feet. "But first, you must listen." "Listen to what?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. The figure pointed to the stones that surrounded them, their surfaces glowing faintly in the twilight. "To the echoes of the past. To the memories that lie buried within these woods, and within yourself." Elara took a deep breath, her heart racing. She didn't know what this figure meant, but something inside her told her to trust it. To trust the forest and the strange magic that seemed to pulse through its roots and leaves. The figure took a step back, its form blending into the shadows once more. "Rest now, Elara," it said, its voice fading into the distance. "The journey has only just begun." And with that, the figure was gone, leaving Elara standing alone in the grove, surrounded by the quiet hum of the ancient stones. The whispers had returned, softer now, more like the murmur of a distant stream, but they no longer frightened her. Instead, they felt comforting, like the lullaby of the forest, lulling her into a deep, dreamless sleep. As her eyes closed, Elara felt the earth beneath her pulse with a quiet, steady rhythm, as if the very heart of the forest was beating in time with her own. And as she drifted off, she knew, deep in her soul, that this was only the beginning. Chapter 3: The Dream Weaver. When Elara woke again, it was to the soft touch of dawn. Pale light filtered through the trees, casting long, gentle shadows on the forest floor. She felt oddly refreshed, as if she had slept for days, though it couldn't have been more than a few hours. The grove was quiet, the whispers from the night before gone, replaced by the peaceful murmur of birds beginning their morning songs. She sat up slowly, her muscles stiff but not unpleasantly so, and stretched. As she looked around, the events of the previous day returned to her in vivid detail. The strange figure, the circle of stones, the voices speaking to her through the forest, had it been real? It felt too tangible to be a dream, yet there was something otherworldly about it all. Elara rose to her feet, brushing the soft moss from her clothes, and looked at the stones that still stood around her in a perfect circle. Their surfaces, once glowing faintly, now looked like any ordinary stone. The symbols carved into them were barely visible in the morning light, as if they had retreated back into the earth. A sense of calm still lingered in the air, but the quiet magic of the night had faded. It was as if the forest had returned to its natural state, waiting patiently for something, or perhaps someone, to stir it back to life. The memory of the figure's words echoed in her mind. "The answers you seek are found within." But what did that mean? Elara had spent her whole life searching for something, though she had never known quite what it was. She had wandered from place to place, never settling, always driven by a restlessness she couldn't explain. And now, here in the heart of this ancient forest, she had been told that the answers she sought were not out there in the world, but within her. Elara wasn't sure where to go next. The figure had disappeared into the forest without offering any further guidance, and the stones, which had seemed so important last night, now felt like nothing more than silent watchers. But there was something about this place that pulled at her, a quiet sense that the forest itself had more to reveal. With a deep breath, Elara stepped away from the stone circle and began to walk. She had no clear direction, but something in her heart told her to trust the forest, to follow wherever it led. The trees seemed to part for her as she moved, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the ground beneath her feet felt soft, almost as though it was guiding her steps. As she walked, time seemed to stretch and blur. Minutes felt like hours, and yet she didn't feel tired or impatient. There was a peace in the rhythm of her footsteps and the quiet sounds of the forest around her. Occasionally, she would hear a rustling in the underbrush or the distant call of a bird, but otherwise, the forest was still. It was as though it was watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. After what felt like an eternity of walking, Elara came upon a small, hidden glade. It was unlike anything she had seen before. The trees here were shorter, their branches arching overhead to form a delicate canopy that filtered the sunlight into a soft, golden glow. At the center of the glade stood a small pool of water, so still and clear it looked like a mirror. The surface reflected the sky above, and as Elara stepped closer, she saw her own face staring back at her. She knelt at the edge of the pool, captivated by the stillness of the water. It was so clear, she could see the smooth stones at the bottom, glistening in the faint light. There was something deeply calming about this place, something that made her feel safe, as though the world outside didn't exist. Here, in this quiet glade, nothing mattered but the present moment. As Elara gazed into the pool, she noticed something strange. At first, she thought it was just her reflection, distorted by the ripples in the water. But then she realized it wasn't her reflection at all, it was something else, something beneath the surface. A faint shimmer, like the glow of moonlight on water, began to form in the center of the pool. It swirled gently, as though the water itself was alive, and slowly, a figure began to take shape. Elara blinked, unsure if she was imagining it, but the figure grew clearer with each passing moment. It was a woman, her form made entirely of shimmering light. She floated just beneath the surface of the water, her long hair swirling around her like a dark cloud. Her eyes, though faint, seemed to gaze directly at Elara, filled with a quiet, ancient wisdom. Elara gasped, instinctively leaning back from the edge of the pool, but the figure remained, her presence calm and unthreatening. The light from her form shimmered and danced on the surface of the water, casting soft reflections on the trees and stones around them. "Do not fear," the figure said, her voice soft and melodic, like the sound of wind chimes in the distance. "I have been waiting for you." Elara stared, her heart racing. Who are you?" The woman smiled, a gentle, almost sad smile. "I am a weaver of dreams, a guardian of the paths between the waking world and the realms beyond. You have been called here, Elara, because you walk the line between these worlds." Elara's mind raced. A weaver of dreams? She had heard tales of such beings, whispered in taverns and villages she had passed through in her travels. They were said to be creatures of magic, able to move between dreams and reality, guiding those who had lost their way. But they were only stories, weren't they? "I don't understand," Elara said, her voice trembling. "Why me? Why was I called here?" The weaver's eyes softened. "Because you have been searching, Elara. You have wandered far and wide, seeking something you cannot name. You are not alone in this. There are many who seek, many who feel the pull of something greater. But few are able to hear the call, and fewer still are brave enough to follow it. Elara felt a lump form in her throat. The weaver's words struck something deep within her, something she had tried to ignore for years. She had always felt that pull, that restlessness, but she had never understood it. Until now. You stand at a crossroads, the weaver continued. You have been searching for meaning, for purpose, but the answers you seek are not found in the world around you. They lie within, in the depths of your own soul. The journey you have begun will take you far beyond the limits of the physical world, into realms where dreams and reality intertwine. Elara swallowed hard. But how? How do I find these answers? The weaver's form shimmered, and for a moment, Elara thought she might disappear. But then the woman's voice filled the glade once more, as soft and steady as the gentle breeze that stirred the leaves overhead. You must learn to listen, the weaver said. To the whispers of the forest, to the echoes of your own heart. The path ahead will not be easy, but you are not alone. The forest will guide you, as it has guided others before you. Elara looked down at the pool, at the shimmering figure below the surface, and felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The fear, the confusion, it was still there, but it no longer overwhelmed her. Instead, she felt a quiet determination, a certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The weaver smiled once more, her form growing fainter as the light of the rising sun touched the water. Remember, Elara, she said, her voice fading like the last notes of a distant song. The answers lie within. And with that, the weaver of dreams disappeared, leaving the pool as still and silent as it had been before. Elara stood there for a long moment, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had seen, but also lighter somehow, as if a part of her had been unlocked. She didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the right path. With a deep breath, she turned away from the pool and began walking again, deeper into the forest, knowing that her journey had only just begun. Chapter 4: The Path of Shadows. As Elara ventured deeper into the heart of the Whispering Woods, the forest around her began to change. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient trees. The soft light of the morning had faded into a twilight haze, casting long shadows across the ground. Time felt different here, slower, as though each step she took stretched the moment into something eternal. The memory of the weaver of dreams lingered in Elara's mind. The strange, luminous figure beneath the water had told her to listen, to trust the forest, but what did that mean? The answers lay within, the weaver had said. But how was she supposed to find those answers in a place so full of mystery, where every shadow seemed to hide something unseen? Elara pressed on, her steps steady but her thoughts a tangle of uncertainty. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees here were older, their bark rough and twisted, their branches heavy with dark, moss-draped leaves. The ground beneath her feet was soft, like walking on a bed of ancient roots, and every now and then she would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye, a flicker of something darting between the trees, too quick to be seen clearly. There was something alive in this part of the forest, something more than the trees and the animals that surely made their home here. It was as if the forest itself was watching her, its presence woven into every branch, every leaf. She could feel it, a quiet hum of energy that pulsed just beneath the surface of everything around her. As she walked, Elara found herself drawn toward a narrow, winding path that cut through the trees. It wasn't a path made by human hands. It was something older, more natural, as though the forest had shaped it over time. The path twisted and turned, and with each step, the shadows grew deeper, darker. Yet there was something about it that felt right, as though the forest was guiding her toward something she needed to see. After what felt like hours of walking, Elara emerged into another clearing. This one was different from the others she had encountered. The air here was thick with silence, as though even the birds and insects had fallen still. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone archway, half hidden by vines and moss. The stone was dark and smooth, its surface marked with the same strange symbols she had seen in the circle of stones earlier. But here, the symbols glowed faintly in the twilight, their light pulsing softly like the heartbeat of the forest. Elara approached the archway, her heart racing. There was something ancient about it, something that hummed with power. As she stepped closer, she felt the air around her grow colder, and for a moment, she hesitated. The archway seemed to lead into darkness, a shadowy void that swallowed the light. But as she stood there, staring into the darkness, she felt something stir within her. It was faint at first, like a whisper in the back of her mind, but it grew stronger with each passing second. It was the same pull she had felt when she first entered the forest, the same quiet call that had led her to this place. Elara took a deep breath, gathering her courage, and stepped through the archway. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world around her shifted. The air grew colder, sharper, and the soft twilight of the forest was replaced by an oppressive darkness. For a moment, she couldn't see anything at all, and panic flared in her chest. But then, slowly, her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she realized she was no longer in the forest at all. She stood at the edge of a vast, barren landscape, the ground beneath her feet hard and cracked like ancient stone. The sky above was a deep, inky black, with no stars, no moon to offer light. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the ground itself, a soft, eerie light that pulsed rhythmically, in time with her own heartbeat. In the distance, Elara could see shapes moving, figures cloaked in shadow, their forms indistinct and shifting. They moved slowly, deliberately, as though they were searching for something or someone. And as she watched them, Elara felt a chill run down her spine. The path of shadows, she thought. I've crossed into the realm of shadows. This place felt wrong, as though it existed outside of time, outside of the natural world. And yet, there was something familiar about it, something that tugged at the edges of her memory. She had heard stories of places like this, places where the boundaries between the waking world and the world of dreams blurred, where shadow and light intertwined. But she had never thought such a place could be real. As she stood there, trying to make sense of her surroundings, she heard a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling, like the shifting of fabric or the whisper of wind through leaves. Elara turned slowly, her heart pounding, and saw a figure standing just a few feet away. It was the same figure she had seen before, the one cloaked in darkness, with a face hidden beneath a hood. But here, in the realm of shadows, the figure seemed more substantial, more real. Its form was solid, and though its face was still obscured, Elara could sense its eyes on her, watching her closely. "You've come far, Elara," the figure said, its voice a low, soothing murmur. "But the path you walk is not yet clear." Elara swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why have you brought me here?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering her question. "I am a guide, as I told you before. But I am also a part of this forest, a part of the magic that lives within it. I exist here, in the space between worlds, where shadows and dreams meet." Elara frowned, confusion swirling in her mind. "What do you want from me?" The figure took a step closer, its presence calm but powerful. "It is not what I want, Elara. It is what you seek. You have been searching for answers, for meaning, but the answers you seek are not so easily found. They are buried deep within the shadows of your own heart, hidden from the light." Elara's chest tightened. "The shadows? What do you mean?" The figure reached out, a hand emerging from beneath its cloak, and gestured to the barren landscape around them. "This is a place of shadows, a reflection of the fears and doubts that lie within. To find the truth, you must face what is hidden here. You must confront the darkness that has followed you for so long." Elara's pulse quickened. She didn't want to admit it, but there was truth in the figure's words. She had always felt as though something was chasing her, something she couldn't quite name. It had driven her to keep moving, never settling, never finding peace. But here, in this strange, shadowy realm, she could feel it more strongly than ever. The figure stepped closer still, its presence both comforting and unsettling. "You are not alone in this, Elara. Many have walked this path before you. But each journey is different, each shadow unique. The only way forward is through." Elara's breath hitched in her throat. "What if I'm not ready?" The figure was silent for a long moment, and then it spoke, its voice soft and almost kind. "No one is ever truly ready to face their shadows. But the longer you run, the longer they will chase you." Elara closed her eyes, her heart heavy with the weight of the figure's words. She had been running for so long, trying to outrun something she didn't even fully understand. But here, in this place of shadows, there was no more running. The forest had brought her here for a reason, and now she had to face whatever waited for her in the darkness. With a deep breath, Elara opened her eyes and nodded. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. The figure nodded in return, and as it did, the shadows around them seemed to shift and stir, as though the entire landscape was alive. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and in the distance, the shadowy figures began to move toward her, their forms growing clearer with each passing moment. Elara's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground, her gaze steady as she watched the shadows approach. This was her path now, and there was no turning back. Chapter 5: The Silent Watchers. Elara stood motionless as the shadows approached, her heart thudding in her chest. The figures that moved toward her seemed both real and unreal, their forms flickering in and out of focus like images seen through smoke. They were neither solid nor completely transparent, but something in between, as though they existed on the edge of reality, just beyond the grasp of understanding. As they drew closer, Elara could make out more details. Their shapes were vaguely human, but their faces were blank, featureless masks of darkness that seemed to absorb the dim light of the shadowed realm. They moved slowly, with an eerie, deliberate grace, their bodies shifting like smoke in the wind. There was no malice in their approach, but neither was there comfort. They were simply there, a part of the landscape, like the stones and trees. Elara's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she considered turning and running. But the figure's words echoed in her mind, "The only way forward is through." She knew that whatever these shadows were, whatever they represented, she had to face them. They were part of her journey, part of the truth she sought. The shadows stopped a few feet in front of her, forming a loose circle. Elara's skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, even though the figures had no eyes. She could feel their presence, heavy and expectant, as if they were waiting for her to make the next move. One of the shadows shifted slightly, and Elara felt a subtle change in the air. It was as if the figure was trying to speak, though no sound emerged. Instead, she felt a tug in the back of her mind, a pull towards something deep within herself. It was the same feeling she had experienced when she had entered the forest, that quiet, insistent call that had led her here. The figure closest to her raised an arm, its movement slow and deliberate. Elara's breath quickened, but she held her ground. The shadow reached out, and though it had no discernible hand, Elara could feel its touch, a light pressure against her chest, cold but not painful. The moment the shadow made contact, a rush of images flooded her mind, overwhelming her senses. Memories, fragmented, disjointed, flashed before her eyes. She saw herself as a child, running through the fields near her village, laughing under the bright summer sun. She saw her parents, their faces soft with love, but blurred by the haze of time. And then she saw something darker, nights spent alone in unfamiliar places, moving from town to town, never staying long enough to make a home. The faces of strangers passed before her, some kind, some indifferent, but all distant. And always, there was that feeling of something just out of reach, something she could never quite grasp. Elara gasped, her knees buckling under the weight of the memories. She staggered, but the shadow did not release its hold. The images continued to flash before her, faster now, more insistent. She saw herself standing at the edge of the forest, the wind whispering her name. She saw the great silver tree in the clearing, its roots winding deep into the earth, and she heard the voices, soft and distant, calling to her from the darkness. And then she saw something else, something she hadn't expected. It was a memory, but not one she recognized. She was standing in a room, dimly lit by a single flickering candle. The air was thick with the smell of incense and something sweet, like honey. She was holding a small, ornate box in her hands, its surface covered in intricate carvings. As she looked down at the box, she felt a strange sense of dread, as though opening it would release something terrible, something she couldn't control. Her heart raced, and yet, despite her fear, her hands moved on their own, lifting the lid. Inside was a single object, a shard of glass, small and sharp, glowing faintly in the candlelight. It was beautiful and dangerous all at once, and as she reached for it, she felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of loss. A voice echoed in her mind, distant and distorted, but unmistakable. "This is your choice. What is broken can never be mended." Elara jerked back, the memory shattering like the glass in the box. She stumbled, the connection with the shadow severed, and for a moment, the world around her spun. She could feel the other shadows watching her, their presence heavy with expectation, but none of them moved. They were waiting for her to understand. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps as she tried to make sense of what she had seen. The memories, the faces, the places, those were hers, fragments of a life lived in motion, always searching, never settling. But that final image, the box and the shard of glass, it wasn't hers. Or at least, it wasn't a memory she could recall. And yet, it felt real, as though it belonged to her in some way she couldn't fully comprehend. Elara's gaze drifted to the shadows, her pulse still racing. "What was that?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The figure closest to her tilted its head, though it made no sound. Instead, she felt another tug, this time deeper, more insistent. It was as if the shadows were trying to guide her, to show her something she needed to see, something she had buried deep within herself. The cold pressure returned, this time at the base of her skull, and another rush of images filled her mind. But these were different. They were not memories, at least, not hers. She saw places she had never been, people she had never met. A vast, endless desert stretching under a blood-red sky. A tower of black stone rising from the center of a storm-swept ocean. And there, standing at the edge of the world, was a woman. Her hair was dark, her eyes bright and filled with fire. She wore a cloak of silver and gold, and in her hand, she held the same ornate box that Elara had seen in her vision. The woman turned, and Elara's breath caught in her throat. The woman was her, older, worn by time and experience, but undeniably her. She stood at the precipice, her expression one of calm resolve, and without hesitation, she opened the box. The shard of glass inside glowed with an eerie light, and as the woman held it up to the stormy sky, the world around her began to change. The sky darkened, the sea churned, and the earth trembled beneath her feet. Elara's pulse quickened, panic rising in her chest. She wanted to shout, to warn the woman to stop, but no sound came from her lips. She was helpless, an observer in this strange, distant vision, watching as the world unraveled around her. The shard in the woman's hand began to glow brighter, pulsing with an energy that seemed to consume everything around it. The storm grew stronger, the wind howling like a beast unleashed, and just as the woman raised the shard to the sky, the vision shattered. Elara gasped, her eyes snapping open, the shadowy figures still standing in their silent circle around her. The cold pressure against her skull faded, leaving behind a dull ache, and for a moment she could do nothing but stand there, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure in front of her remained motionless, its form still flickering like smoke in the wind. But something had changed. The weight of their presence no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it felt expectant, as if the shadows had shown her what they needed to, and now they were waiting for her to act. Elara swallowed hard, her mind racing. The visions, the memories, they weren't just fragments of the past. They were pieces of a puzzle, clues to something much larger than herself. The box, the shard of glass, the woman standing at the edge of the world, it all meant something. But what? She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and looked up at the figure before her. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. The figure didn't answer, but Elara didn't need words. The answer was already within her, buried deep beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The only way forward was through. And now, she had to find the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The shadows parted, the path before her dark and uncertain, but Elara knew there was no turning back. She had crossed into the realm of shadows, and the truth she sought lay somewhere within. With one final glance at the silent watchers, she stepped forward into the darkness. Chapter 6: The Mirror of Souls. Elara moved through the shadows, her steps careful but steady. The figures that had surrounded her moments ago had faded back into the darkness, becoming part of the silent landscape once more. The air here was dense, like the weight of an impending storm, but despite the tension, Elara felt a strange sense of clarity. She had crossed into this realm, seeing the visions of a past she didn't fully understand, and though the puzzle pieces were still scattered, a new certainty had taken root within her. The path ahead was narrow, bordered by towering trees whose bark gleamed faintly in the dim light. Their branches twisted overhead like skeletal hands, creating a canopy that blocked out what little light remained. Yet there was something guiding her, a pull she could feel deep within her chest, drawing her toward whatever awaited her in the heart of this strange place. The vision of the woman, her older self, haunted her thoughts. What had she been doing with that shard of glass? What had the storm and the sea meant? And why had the shadowed figures shown her that particular moment? Elara knew there was a deeper meaning to it all, but the answers felt just out of reach, like a word on the tip of her tongue she couldn't quite grasp. As she pressed on, the landscape began to change. The trees grew thinner, and the air seemed to lighten, though it still held the eerie stillness that had enveloped the shadowy realm. The ground beneath her feet became firmer, the roots and rocks that had once twisted through her path now replaced by smooth, dark stone. It was as if the forest had retreated, giving way to something more intentional, more constructed. Before long, Elara found herself standing at the edge of another clearing, but this one was unlike any she had seen before. At its center stood a large, circular pool, its surface as smooth and dark as obsidian. Surrounding the pool were ancient stone pillars, each one etched with the same strange symbols she had seen earlier, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with a soft, inner light. The air around the pool was cool, almost unnaturally so, and a low hum resonated from the stones, vibrating through the ground and into Elara's bones. She hesitated at the edge of the clearing, her breath catching in her throat. There was something deeply sacred about this place, something that felt alive in a way that the forest had not. The pool seemed to call to her, its dark surface beckoning like a mirror reflecting the void. Elara took a deep breath, her heart racing, and stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold of the clearing, she felt it, the presence. It wasn't the same as the silent watchers, those shadowed figures that had guided her here. This presence was older, more powerful. It was woven into the very fabric of the place, pulsing in time with the steady hum of the stones. As she approached the pool, the air around her grew colder, and the surface of the water rippled gently, as though stirred by an unseen hand. Elara knelt at the edge, staring into the dark water. For a moment, she saw nothing but her own reflection, a pale face, wide eyes, and dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. But then, as she looked deeper, something else began to take shape. At first, it was faint, just a shimmer beneath the surface. But as Elara continued to watch, the image grew clearer, solidifying into something more tangible. She saw the outline of a figure, a woman, much like herself but older, her face lined with the weight of years and knowledge. It was the same woman from the vision, the one who had stood at the edge of the world holding the shard of glass. The reflection stared back at her, its expression calm but knowing, as if it was waiting for Elara to ask the question that had been burning inside her since she had first crossed into this strange realm. "Who are you?" Elara whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the stones. The reflection didn't answer immediately. Instead, it shifted slightly, its form flickering like a candle flame in the wind. When it finally spoke, the voice was soft, echoing through the stillness like a distant memory. "I am you, Elara," the reflection said, its gaze steady. I am what you will become, should you continue on this path. Elara's breath caught in her throat. You're me? The reflection nodded, the movement subtle, like a ripple across the water. I am a part of you, a part that has always existed, though you may not have realized it. You are walking a path that few can see, a path between worlds, between light and shadow, dreams and reality. Elara frowned, her mind racing to catch up with the words. I don't understand. Why am I here? Why have I been called to this place? The reflection's expression softened, and for a moment, Elara thought she saw a flicker of sadness in the woman's eyes. You have been searching for answers, Elara. Searching for meaning, for purpose. You have wandered from place to place, never settling, always feeling that something was missing. This forest, this journey, it is not by chance that you have come here. You were meant to find this place, to find the truth hidden within yourself. Elara shook her head, confusion swirling inside her. But what truth? What is it that I'm supposed to see? The reflection's gaze intensified, and the air around Elara seemed to thicken, the hum of the stones growing louder. The truth of who you are, of who you were meant to be. You are not like the others, Elara. You are a weaver of dreams, a walker between worlds. The visions you have seen, the shadows you have faced, they are all part of the journey, part of the process of becoming. Elara's pulse quickened. A weaver of dreams? Like the figure I saw in the pool? The reflection nodded once more. Yes. The weaver you met was a guide, just as the shadows were guides. They have been leading you here, to this moment. But now, the choice is yours. To fully embrace what you are, you must confront the final truth. You must look into the heart of the mirror of souls. Elara's gaze shifted to the pool at her feet, its dark surface smooth and still. The mirror of souls? The reflection's voice grew quieter, more distant, as though it was fading. This pool is more than water, more than a simple reflection. It is a mirror, a window into the deepest part of your soul. What you see here will not be easy to face, but it is necessary if you are to complete your journey. Elara's heart raced. The idea of staring into the depths of her soul, of seeing what lay hidden within, filled her with both dread and anticipation. She had come this far, crossed into the realm of shadows, faced visions she couldn't explain, and now, here she was, standing on the edge of the truth she had been searching for. With a deep breath, Elara leaned forward and placed her hand on the surface of the water. The moment her fingers touched it, the pool shimmered, and the image of the reflection began to dissolve. The water rippled, and then, slowly, a new image began to form. At first, it was just darkness, an endless void, stretching out into eternity. But as Elara stared deeper, shapes began to emerge. She saw fragments of her past, memories of her childhood, of her parents, of the faces of strangers she had met along her journey. She saw the places she had been, the roads she had walked, all blending together in a swirling tapestry of light and shadow. And then, at the center of it all, she saw herself standing alone, surrounded by darkness. But this version of herself was different. She was older, stronger, her eyes filled with a quiet power that Elara had never seen before. In her hand, she held the shard of glass, the same one from the vision. Its surface gleamed with an otherworldly light, casting long shadows across the ground. The older version of herself stared back at Elara, her expression unreadable. And then, without a word, she raised the shard of glass and placed it against her chest. Elara's breath caught in her throat as the older version of herself pressed the shard into her skin. There was no blood, no sign of pain, but the moment the shard touched her heart, the world around them changed. The darkness dissolved, replaced by a brilliant light that seemed to emanate from the shard itself. The light spread, filling the void with warmth and energy, until there was nothing left but the two of them, Elara and her reflection, standing in the center of the light. And then, in a voice that was both hers and not hers, the reflection spoke one final time. "This is your choice, Elara. To embrace the light or to remain in the shadow. The shard is the key, the piece of your soul that was lost long ago. Only you can decide if you are ready to reclaim it." Elara's heart pounded in her chest. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, but she knew, deep down, that this was the moment she had been searching for. The journey, the visions, the shadows, it had all led to this. With trembling hands, Elara reached out toward the reflection, her fingers brushing against the light of the shard. The warmth of it spread through her, filling her with a sense of peace she had never known. And as she closed her hand around the shard, the reflection smiled, a small, knowing smile that seemed to say, "You are ready." The light enveloped her, and the world around her dissolved into a brilliant, blinding glow. In that moment, Elara knew she had found the truth she had been searching for all along. And she was ready to embrace it. Chapter 7: The Shattered Veil. Elara floated in a sea of light, weightless and unmoored from the world she had known. The blinding glow that had enveloped her felt warm and soothing, as though it were not light at all, but something deeper, an essence that held her in its embrace, soft and nurturing. Time seemed to slip away, dissolving into the radiance around her. She had no sense of how long she had been there, drifting between moments, only that the light was leading her somewhere, pulling her toward a truth that lay beyond everything she had ever known. And then, slowly, the light began to recede. At first, it was subtle, like the dimming of twilight after the sun has set, but as the glow faded, Elara felt the weight of the world return to her. The ground beneath her feet solidified, the sensation of standing once again replacing the ethereal suspension. As her surroundings came into focus, she realized she was no longer in the shadowy forest, nor was she in the realm of light where the reflection of her older self had spoken to her. She was standing on the edge of a cliff, overlooking a vast expanse of sky and ocean. The sky above was a deep indigo, and the horizon was awash in shades of crimson and violet, as though the sun had just set and the night was beginning to claim the world. Far below, the ocean churned and roared, waves crashing against jagged rocks with a force that reverberated through the air. Elara's heart raced as she took in the scene. This place, this wild, untamed landscape, felt both foreign and familiar at once. It reminded her of the vision she had seen earlier, the one where the older version of herself had stood at the edge of the world, holding the shard of glass against the storm. But here, the air was calm, the sea's fury distant and detached, and there was no shard, no reflection to guide her. She was alone. For a moment, Elara's mind spun with confusion. Where was she? What had happened after she had grasped the shard of light in the mirror of souls? She had felt so sure, so certain that she was on the cusp of understanding everything, but now, standing on the precipice of this endless cliff, doubt began to creep in. This is part of the journey, she reminded herself. There is more to see, more to learn. With a deep breath, Elara turned away from the edge of the cliff and began to walk along the narrow path that wound its way down toward the ocean. The air here was cool and carried the scent of salt and earth. The ground beneath her feet was rough, the stones worn smooth by time and the elements. As she descended, the roar of the waves grew louder, echoing in her ears like a distant song. The path led her down to a narrow beach, a strip of black sand that stretched out before her like a shadow. The ocean was vast, its dark waters rippling under the dying light of the sky, and as Elara approached, she saw something strange, something that made her pause. There, standing at the water's edge, was a figure. Elara's breath caught in her throat as she approached. The figure was cloaked in a long, dark robe, the fabric shifting gently in the breeze. Its back was to her, but even from this distance, Elara could feel the power radiating from it, a quiet, ancient strength that seemed to ripple through the air like the waves themselves. She knew this figure. She had seen it before. As she drew closer, the figure turned, and Elara's heart skipped a beat. It was the same figure from the shadows, the one who had guided her into the realm of darkness, who had shown her the way forward. But here, under the vast expanse of sky and ocean, the figure's presence felt different. It was no longer a shadow, no longer a mere guide. There was something more to it now, something Elara couldn't quite place. "You have come far," the figure said, its voice low and calm, as though it had been expecting her. "Farther than most." Elara swallowed, her pulse quickening. "I've followed the path you set for me. I've faced the visions, the shadows, but I still don't understand. What is this place? What is it that I'm supposed to do?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as though considering her question. "This is the threshold," it said after a moment. "The place where the veil between worlds is thinnest. You stand on the edge of something greater than yourself, Elara. But before you can move forward, there is one final truth you must face." Elara's stomach tightened. What truth? The figure gestured to the ocean behind it. The veil between this world and the next is fragile, easily shattered. It is a mirror, reflecting the truths we hide from ourselves. But what lies beyond it is something few are willing to confront. Elara's gaze drifted to the water. The surface was smooth, almost unnaturally so, as though the waves themselves had stilled in anticipation. There was something unsettling about the ocean, something that made her skin prickle with unease. She took a step forward, her eyes narrowing as she tried to see beyond the dark surface. And then she saw it. Just beneath the water, there was a faint shimmer, a ripple of light that twisted and danced like a reflection of the stars. It grew brighter as she watched, and soon the surface of the ocean began to change. The water seemed to pull back, revealing a vast expanse of shimmering light beneath the waves. It was as though the ocean itself had become a mirror, reflecting not the sky above, but something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of reality. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped closer to the water's edge. The light beneath the surface grew brighter, and as it did, she saw something else, figures, moving through the light, their forms indistinct but undeniably human. They shifted and swirled, their movements graceful yet strange, as though they were suspended in a world beyond time. The figure at her side remained silent, watching her closely. Elara could feel its gaze on her, heavy with expectation, but it said nothing more. This was her moment. Whatever truth lay within the mirror of the ocean, she had to face it alone. Taking a deep breath, Elara knelt at the water's edge and reached out. The moment her fingers touched the surface, the world around her shifted. The light beneath the water exploded into brilliance, enveloping her in a blinding glow. The figures within the light surged forward, their forms becoming clearer, more defined, and Elara realized with a start that she recognized them. They were the people she had encountered along her journey, her parents, the strangers in the town she had passed through, even the weaver of dreams. They swirled around her, their faces filled with a quiet, unspoken understanding. But there was one figure that stood out among the others. It was her. The older version of herself, the one she had seen in the visions, stood at the center of the light, her eyes glowing with a quiet intensity. She held the shard of glass in her hand, the same shard Elara had seen in her previous vision, and as she stepped forward, the other figures seemed to fade into the background. Elara, the older version of herself, said, her voice soft but firm, "You are standing at the threshold, just as I once did. The journey you've taken has brought you here, to the edge of the veil. But now, you must make a choice." Elara's throat tightened. What choice? The older version of herself held out the shard of glass. Its surface shimmered with an inner light, pulsing gently in time with the rhythm of the waves. "This shard is a piece of your soul," she said. "It was lost long ago, hidden within the shadows of your past. To move forward, to embrace the truth of who you are, you must reclaim it." Elara stared at the shard, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, and she felt a surge of fear rise within her. What if she wasn't ready? What if the truth she sought was too much to bear? But deep down, she knew there was no turning back. She had come too far, seen too much, to walk away now. With trembling hands, Elara reached out and took the shard. The moment her fingers closed around it, the world shattered. The light, the ocean, the figures, all of it exploded into a million fragments, swirling around her like a storm of stars. The ground beneath her feet gave way, and she felt herself falling, tumbling through the void, the shard clutched tightly in her hand. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. Elara landed softly on the ground, the light and chaos fading into silence. She was back in the forest, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The shard of glass was still in her hand, its surface smooth and warm, pulsing gently with the rhythm of her heartbeat. The figure was gone. Elara stood alone in the clearing, the weight of the shard heavy in her hand. The journey wasn't over, not yet. But she had reclaimed the piece of herself that had been lost, and with it, she had taken the first step toward the truth that awaited her beyond the veil. With a deep breath, Elara closed her eyes, the shard glowing softly in her palm. And she knew that the final test lay ahead. Chapter 8: The Weaver's Awakening. The forest was silent, the air still and cool as the night wrapped around Elara. She stood in the clearing, the shard of glass glowing softly in her hand, its warmth spreading through her body like a gentle flame. The weight of her journey, the visions, the shadows, all of it, felt distant now, as though they had been part of a dream she was only just waking from. Elara looked around, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the forest. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches barely moving in the night breeze. There was no sign of the shadowy figures that had guided her, no trace of the mirror of souls or the vast ocean she had seen in the realm of light. It was as though the world had shifted back into place, settling around her like a cloak of familiarity. But something had changed. She could feel it, deep within her, a quiet pulse of energy that thrummed in time with her heartbeat. The shard in her hand, once just a symbol of the journey she had taken, now felt like an extension of herself, a piece of her soul that had been missing for so long. Holding it was like holding a key to something far greater than she had ever imagined. With a deep breath, Elara closed her hand around the shard and began to walk. The forest seemed to welcome her now, its paths clear and open, as though it had been waiting for her return. The trees no longer loomed with their ancient secrets, and the shadows that had once filled her with unease now felt like old companions, watching over her with a quiet, patient presence. As she walked, memories of her journey began to surface in her mind, the moment she had first stepped into the whispering woods, the eerie calm of the circle of stones, the soft, melodic voice of the weaver of dreams. Each memory felt distant and yet vivid, like pieces of a puzzle that had finally clicked into place. She was no longer the wandering traveler who had come seeking answers. She was something more now, something greater. It wasn't long before Elara reached the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to a broad, moonlit field. She recognized this place. It was the same field she had crossed when she first entered the woods, though it felt like a lifetime ago. The village she had passed through lay far in the distance, its warm lights glowing faintly on the horizon, but Elara felt no pull to return to it. Instead, she paused at the edge of the field and looked up at the sky. The stars glittered above her, bright and countless, like a map of the universe spread out across the heavens. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Elara felt truly at peace. There was no restlessness in her heart, no yearning for something just out of reach. She had found what she had been searching for all along, not in the world around her, but within herself. And then, as she stood there in the stillness of the night, she felt it, the presence. It was faint at first, a soft stirring in the air, but it grew stronger with each passing moment, wrapping around her like a familiar embrace. Elara's breath caught in her throat as she turned, her heart racing with recognition. There, standing at the edge of the field, was the figure she had seen so many times before, the one cloaked in darkness, the guide who had led her through the realm of shadows. But now, the figure's form was different. The shadows that had once cloaked it had lifted, revealing a woman beneath, her face no longer hidden. She was tall, her features sharp and elegant, her hair as dark as the night sky, and her eyes were filled with light, glowing with the same quiet power that pulsed in the shard Elara held. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. "It's you," she whispered. The woman smiled, a small, knowing smile. "It is." Elara took a step forward, the shard in her hand growing warmer as she moved closer. "You've been guiding me all this time," she said. "Through the shadows, through the visions, but why? What was all of this for?" The woman's smile deepened, and when she spoke, her voice was soft, melodic, like the sound of wind through the trees. "I have been guiding you, yes, but the path was always yours to walk. You came here seeking answers, Elara, answers to questions that have haunted you for years. But the truth is, those answers were never outside of you. They were always within." Elara frowned, her mind racing. "Within me?" The woman nodded, her gaze steady. "You are a weaver of dreams, Elara. You have always been. The magic of the forest, the shadows, the visions, they are not separate from you. They are part of you, part of the power that has been waiting for you to awaken." Elara's breath caught in her throat. "A weaver of dreams?" The woman stepped closer, her presence radiating warmth and strength. "Yes. Just as I am, and as those who came before you were. We walk between worlds, between light and shadow, weaving the threads of reality and dreams. It is a gift, one that has been passed down through generations, but it is also a responsibility. To embrace it fully is to accept that you are more than what you once believed." Elara stared at the woman, her mind spinning with the weight of the revelation. A weaver of dreams. The title felt strange on her tongue, but at the same time, it felt right, as though she had always known, deep down, that she was destined for something greater. Her entire life had been shaped by the pull of something she couldn't name, something that had drawn her to the far corners of the world, always searching, always yearning. And now, standing here in the moonlit field, she understood why. "This is why I came here," Elara said softly. "To find this, to find myself." The woman's eyes gleamed with understanding. "Yes. And now, you are ready to take the next step." Elara looked down at the shard of glass in her hand. Its surface shimmered with a soft, inner light, pulsing gently in time with her heartbeat. The piece of her soul that had been lost, hidden within the shadows, now fully reclaimed. She could feel its power coursing through her, a quiet but steady strength that filled her with purpose. "What do I do now?" Elara asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The woman stepped closer, her gaze soft but unwavering. "Now, you begin your work. You weave the dreams of those who seek answers, just as you once did. You walk the paths between worlds, guiding others through the shadows, helping them find the truth within themselves." Elara's heart swelled with both anticipation and a quiet understanding. She had been searching for so long, wandering from place to place, always looking for something she couldn't name. But now, the path was clear. She was a weaver of dreams, and her journey had only just begun. With a deep breath, Elara closed her eyes and lifted the shard to her chest. As its warmth spread through her, she felt the boundaries of the world shift around her. The forest, the field, the stars above, they were all part of the same tapestry, threads woven together in a delicate dance of light and shadow. And she was part of it too, her soul connected to the magic that flowed through the world, through the dreams of all those who sought truth. When Elara opened her eyes, the woman was gone, but the presence remained. It pulsed within her, steady and strong, as though the forest itself was alive with her newfound purpose. She smiled, feeling the weight of her journey lift from her shoulders. The answers she had sought had always been within her, waiting for the moment she was ready to see them. And now, with the shard of her soul restored and the path ahead clear, Elara knew that her work as a weaver of dreams had only just begun. With a final glance at the stars, Elara turned and walked into the night, the light of the shard guiding her way forward. Thus, the Whispering Woods became not a place of mystery and shadow, but a place of revelation, where those who were lost could find their way again. And Elara, the weaver of dreams, walked its paths with quiet purpose, forever listening to the whispers of the forest, guiding others toward the truth hidden within themselves.